Hello, this is Lady Chatterley's Lover. Yes, the romance, the tale, the audiobook, Lady Chatterley's Lover with her gamekeeper, and of course there is her husband to consider as well. And this is me, Morel Benard. So, the continuing story of Lady Chatterley's Lover. Last time, a yellow ray of sun shone over the trees. "Sun," he said, "and time you went. Time, my lady, time. What's that as flies without wings, your ladyship? Time, time." He reached for his shirt. "Say good night to John Thomas," he said, looking down at his penis. "He's safe in the arms of creeping Jenny. Not much burning pestle about him just now." And he put his flannel shirt over his head. "A man's most dangerous moment," he said, when his head had emerged, "is when he's getting into his shirt. Then he puts his head in a bag. That's why I prefer those American shirts that you put on like a jacket." She still stood watching him. He stepped into his short drawers and buttoned them round the waist. "Look at Jane," he said, "in all her blossoms. Who'll put blossoms on you next year, Ginny? Me or somebody else? Goodbye, my bluebell, farewell to you." I hate that song. It's early war days. He then sat down and was pulling on his stockings. She still stood, unmoving. He laid his hand on the slope of her buttocks. "Pretty little Jane. Pretty Lady Jane," he said. "Perhaps in Venice you'll find a man who'll put jasmine in your maiden hair and a pomegranate flower in your navel. Poor little Lady Jane. Don't say those things," she said. "You only say them to hurt me." He dropped his head, then he said in dialect, "Aye, maybe I do, maybe I do. Well then, I'll say nowt, and have done with it. But that mun dress thyself all go back to thy stately homes of England. How beautiful they stand. Time's up. Time's up for Sir John, and for little Lady Jane. Put thy shimmy on, Lady Chartley. That might be anybody standing there, be out even a shimmy, and a few rags of flowers. There then, I'll undress thee, that bobtail young throstle." And he took the leaves from her hair, kissing her damp hair, and the flowers from her breast, and kissed her breast, and kissed her navel, and kissed her maiden hair, where he left the flowers threaded. "They mun stop while they will," he said. "So, there's that bear again, now but a bare-arse lass, and a bit of a Lady Jane. Now put thy shimmy on, for they must go, or else Lady Chatterley's going to be late for dinner. And where have you been to, my pretty maid?" She never knew how to answer him when he was in his condition of the vernacular. So she dressed herself and prepared to go a little ignominiously home to Rugby, or so she felt it, a little ignominiously home. He would accompany her to the broad riding. His young pheasants were all right under the shelter. When he and she came out on the riding, there was Mrs. Bolton faltering palely towards them. "Oh, my lady, we wondered if anything had happened." "No, nothing has happened." Mrs. Bolton looked into the man's face that was smooth and new-looking with love. She met his half-laughing, half-mocking eyes. He always laughed at mischance, but he looked at her kindly. "Evening, Mrs. Bolton. Your ladyship will be all right now, so I can leave you. Good night to your ladyship. Good night, Mrs. Bolton. He saluted and turned away. Connie arrived home to an ordeal of cross-questioning. Clifford had been out at tea time, had come in just before the storm, and where was her ladyship? Nobody knew. Only Mrs. Bolton suggested that she had gone for a walk into the wood. Into the wood, in such a storm. Clifford for once let himself get into a state of nervous frenzy. He started at every flash of lightning and belched at every roll of thunder. He looked at the icy thunder rain as if it dared the end of the world. He got more and more worked up. Mrs. Bolton tried to soothe him. She'll be sheltering in the hut till it's over, don't worry. Her ladyship is all right. I don't like her being in the wood in a storm like this. I don't like her being in the wood at all. She's been gone now more than 2 hours. When did she go out? A little while before you came in. I didn't see her in the park. God knows where she is and what's happened to her. Oh, nothing's happened to her, you'll see. She'll be home directly after the rain stops. It's just the rain that's keeping her. But her ladyship did not come home directly the rain stopped. In fact, time went by. The sun came out for his last yellow glimpse, and there still was no sign of her. The sun was set, it was growing dark, and the first dinner gong had rung. It's no good, said Clifford in a frenzy. I'm going to send out Field and Betts to find her. Oh, don't do that, cried Mrs. Bolton. They'll think there's a suicide or something. Oh, don't start a lot of talk going. Let me slip over to the hut and see if she's not there. I'll find her all right. So after some persuasion, Clifford allowed her to go. And so Connie had come upon her in the drive alone and pain in loitering. You mustn't mind me coming to look for you, my lady. But Sir Clifford worked himself up into such a state, he made sure you were struck by lightning or killed by a falling tree. And he was determined to send Field and Betts to the wood to find the body. So I thought I'd better come, rather than set all the servants agog. She spoke nervously. She could still see on Connie's face the smoothness and the half-dream of passion, and she could feel the irritation against herself. Quite, said Connie, and she could say no more. The two women plodded on through the wet world in silence, while great drops splashed like explosion in the wood. Then they came to the park. Connie strode ahead, and Mrs. Bolton panted a little. She was getting plumper. How foolish of Clifford to make a fuss, said Connie at length, angrily, really speaking to herself. Oh, you know what men are like. They like working themselves up. But he'll be all right as soon as he sees your ladyship. Connie was very angry that Mrs. Bolton knew her secret, for certainly she knew it. Suddenly, Constance stood still on the path. It's monstrous that I should have to be followed, she said, her eyes flashing. Oh, your ladyship, don't say that. He'd certainly have sent the two men, and they'd have come straight to the hut. I didn't know where it was, really. Connie flushed darker with rage at the suggestion. Yet, while her passion was on her, she could not lie. She could not even pretend there was nothing between herself and the keeper. She looked at the other woman, who stood so sly, with her head dropped, yet somehow, in her femaleness, an ally. Oh well, she said. I fit it so. It is so. I don't mind. Why? You're all right, my lady. You've only been sheltering in the hut. It's absolutely nothing. They went on to the house. Connie marched into Clifford's room, furious with him, furious with his pale, overwrought fee and prominent eyes. I must say, I don't think you need send the servants after me, she burst out. My God, he exploded, where have you been, woman? You've been gone hours, and in a storm like this. What the hell? How do you go to that bloody wood for? What have you been up to? It's hours, even since the rain stopped. Hours. Do you know what time it is? You've enough to drive anybody mad. Where have you been? What in the name of hell have you been doing? And what if I don't choose to tell you? She pulled her hat from her head and shook her hair. He lied at her with his eyes bulging and yellow coming into the whites. It was very bad for him to get into these rages. Mrs. Bolton had a weary time with him for days after. Connie felt a sudden qualm. But really, she said, milder, anyone would think I'd been, I don't know where. I just sat in the hut during all the storm and made myself a little fire and was happy. She spoke now easily. After all, why work him up any more? He looked at her suspiciously and looked at her. Your hair, he said. Look at yourself. Yes, she replied calmly. I ran out in the rain with no clothes on. He stared at her speechless. You must be mad, he said. Why? To take a shower bath from the rain? And how did you dry yourself? On an old towel and at the fire. He still stared at her in a dumbfounded way. And supposing anybody came, he said. Who would come? Who? Why, anybody. And Mellors, does he come? He must come in the evenings. Yes, he came later, when it had cleared up, to feed the pheasants with corn. She spoke with amazing nonchalance. Mrs. Bolton, who was listening in the next room, heard in sheer admiration to think a woman could carry it off so naturally. And suppose he'd come while you were running about in the rain with nothing on like a maniac? I suppose he'd have had the fright of his life and cleared out as fast as he could. Clifford still stared at her, transfixed. What he thought in his under consciousness he would never know. And he was too much taken aback to form one clear thought in his upper consciousness. He just simply accepted what she said in a sort of blank. And he admired her. He could not help admiring her. She looked so flushed and handsome and smooth, love smooth. At least, he said, subsiding, you'll be lucky if you've got off without a severe cold. Oh, I haven't got a cold, she replied. She was thinking to herself of the other man's words. That's got the nicest woman's ass of anybody. She dearly wished she could tell Clifford that this had been said her during the famous thunderstorm. However, she bore herself rather like an offended queen and went upstairs to change. That evening, Clifford wanted to be nice to her. He was reading one of the latest scientific religious books. He had a streak of a spurious sort of religion in him and was egocentrically concerned with the future of his own ego. It was like his habit to make conversation to Connie about some book, since the conversation between them had to be made almost chemically. They had almost chemically to concoct it in their heads. What do you think of this, by the way, he said, reaching for his book. You'd have no need to cool your ardent body by running out in the rain, if only we have a few more eons of evolution behind us. Ah, here it is. The universe shows us two aspects. On one side, it is physically wasting. On the other, it is spiritually ascending. Connie listened, expecting more. But Clifford was waiting. She looked at him in surprise. And if it spiritually ascends, she said, what does it leave down below, in the place where its tail used to be? Ah, he said, take the man for what he means. Ascending is the opposite of his wasting, I presume. Spiritually blown out, so to speak. No, but seriously, without joking, do you think there is anything in it? She looked at him again. Physically wasting, she said. I see you getting fatter. And I'm sort of wasting my time, myself. Do you think the sun is smaller than he used to be? He's not to me. And I suppose the apple Adam offered Eve wasn't really much bigger, if any, than one of our orange pippins. Do you think it was? Well, hear how, he goes on. It is thus slowly passing, with a slowness inconceivable in our measures of time, to new creative conditions, amid which the physical world, as we at present know it, will be represented by a ripple barely to be distinguished from non-entity. She listened with a glisten of amusement. All sorts of improper things suggested themselves, but she only said, what silly hocus-pocus, as if his little conceited consciousness could know what was happening as slowly as all that. It only means he's a physical failure on the earth, so he wants to make the whole universe a physical failure. Priggish little impertinence. Oh, but listen, don't interrupt the great man's solemn words. The present type of order in the world has arisen from an unimaginable part and will find its grave in an unimaginable future. There remains the inexhaustive realm of abstract forms and creativity with its shifting character, ever determined afresh by its own creatures and God, upon whom or whose wisdom all forms of order depend. There, that's how he winds it up. Connie sat, listening contemptuously. He's spiritually blown out, she said. What a lot of stuff. Unimaginables, and types of order in graves and realms of abstract forms, and creativity with a shifty character, and God mixed up with forms of order. Why, it's idiotic. I must say, it is a little vaguely conglomerate mixture of gases, so to speak, said Clifford. Still, I think there is something in the idea that the universe is physically wasting and spiritually ascending. Do you? Then let it ascend so long as it leaves me safely and solidly physically here below. Do you like your physique? He asked. I love it. And through my mind went the words, it's the nicest woman's arse as is. But that is really rather extraordinary, because there's no denying it's an encumbrance. But then I suppose a woman doesn't take a supreme pleasure in the life of the mind. Supreme pleasure, she said, looking up at him. is that sort of idiocy, the supreme pleasure of the life of the mind. No, thank you. Give me the body. I believe the life of the body is a greater reality than the life of the mind. When the body is really wakened to life. But so many people, like your famous wind machine, have only got minds tacked on to their physical corpses. He looked at her in wonder. The life of the body, he said, is just the life of the animals. And that's better than the life of professional corpses. But it's not true. The human body is only just coming to real life. With the Greeks it gave a lovely flicker, then Plato and Aristotle killed it, and Jesus finished it off. But now the body is coming really to life. It is really rising from the tomb. And it will be a lovely, lovely life in the lovely universe, the life of the human body. My dear, you speak as if you were ushering it all in. True, you am going away on a holiday, but don't please be quite so indecently elated about it. Believe me, whatever God there is slowly eliminating the guts and elementary system from the human being to evolve a higher, more spiritual being. Why should I believe you, Clifford, when I feel that whatever God there is has at last wakened up in my guts, as you call them, and is rippling so happily there like dawn? Why should I believe you when I feel so very much the contrary? You are listening to Lady Chatterley's Lover. Yes, audiobook here. Lady Chatterley's Lover, the continuing story. Please listen to the next video. Please listen to the next video of Lady Chatterley's Lover. Look forward to you then. Morel Benard. See you then.